Okay, so hello everybody. Welcome to our community Hangouts. So let's get started with our first presentation. So Sergii will start talking about the migration to jQuery 3.5, the benefits and the challenges of such migration. So Sergii, handing over to you.
Thanks, Gabriel. Hello, everyone. Let me probably share my screen here in a minute. Okay, can you see the presentation now?
Yeah, I can see it.
Good, good. So, yes, my name is Sergii Ivashchenko, and you may have heard my presentation in one of the previous Hangout about the PHP 8 compatibility, where we were upgrading some, talking about upgrades of some PHP dependencies, composer dependencies, and then updating on the backend side. So this time we are going further with updates for the libraries that Magento is using. And in this case, we are going to be talking about jQuery, because that's one of the next libraries we would like to update in Magento or Adobe Commerce. So basically, the goal that we have right now is pretty simple. We have quite old jQuery library in Magento as of now. It is version 1.12.4 that was released in 2016. And we are going to update it to the latest jQuery version. As of now, it is 3.6.0. That was released just a couple of months ago. This update is also not so straightforward. And what we are going to do in scope of this, first of all, we are going to work in 2.4 develop branch. We actually have already delivered some changes to the code related to jQuery upgrade there. So you can, watching the 2.4 develop branch, you will see the updates that are going on. And right now we are working on the code base preparation. So as I will tell earlier in this presentation, we are going to, so the new version of jQuery has quite a few breaking changes comparing with the older version. That's expectable considering the differences in versions. So the preparing the code base is basically updating the code we are using with jQuery to be compatible with the latest version. Unfortunately, it is possible to keep almost all the code compatible with both 1.12 and 3.6. So that's fine. As well, jQuery migrate that is really helpful for updating for testing your code compatibility with the next jQuery version. Is also quite outdated in Magento right now, so we are going to update this as well. And we are considering some introducing of some tests that will help to ensure the compatibility with new jQuery version, as well as help you guys to update your customization and extensions or prepare them for the new jQuery version. Apart from jQuery itself, we have lots of JS libraries built in Magento that sometimes are not compatible with the latest jQuery version. So updates of lots of JS libraries as Magento is also coming in scope of this, or let's say as a dependency for this jQuery upgrade. That's something that we are also going to work in. And finally, the jQuery itself and the plugins. Basically, what you can see in the web, in the libweb jQuery folder, is going to be updated to the latest version. So, what this update is going to bring to us? Like the benefits of the update or new features. Well, for sure, there are performance improvements, bug fixes, that a lot of performance improvements and a lot of bug fixes that have been done to jQuery since the version that is in Magento. And also there are some additional cool features that we can utilize. Well, first of all, in the latest version of jQuery, we have the ability to work with the proper promises. So there is a promises support for deferreds. That also that brings the work with jQuery deferreds up to standards, but also brings a lot of backward and compatible changes about which we will talk a bit later in this presentation. So basically, as a simple example, if previously sending the Ajax, we had the ability to specify that the done and fail function that for example, if in the done function we had an exception, the fail is not going to be executed as the fail function is executed on the error of response from Ajax. In the new version, this construction turns to using then and catch methods. That is, and in this case, if the callback specified for then is throwing an exception, we'll be able to actually handle that. There are a couple of additional improvements to handling exceptions as well. Yeah, so here I'm just going to give you a slight overview of several features and several backward and incompatible changes that I think are the most effective, and as well as a short list of a bit less impactful backward and compatible changes and features at the end. And if you guys think, if you have worked with the JavaScript, the update for jQuery for your JavaScript projects previously, and you faced some specific change, you see some specific change challenging, please share this experience with us. I'll add a comment to this meeting. So the second feature is kind of simplifying the work with probably very frequently used jQuery get, jQuery post functions. That is allowing to pass the or the settings object with the parameters for these functions instead of specifying them as arguments one by one. Well, in the latest jQuery, you can do both. You can either specify the parameters or just pass them on alone as an object, like it is now possible for Ajax, for example. So jQuery collections do support the for off loop as of jQuery 3.4.0, and that can bring some spice to coding with jQuery. I think that's a good feature as well. One additional method was introduced that can be useful in case you need to work with the selectors with the IDs or classes that have special characters that are special for CSS selectors. For example, in case if ID of the element, or let's say the class of the element contains dots, we could use the escape selector jQuery function to escape it. And in this case, we'll be looking for a single ID with dots or class with dots instead of trying to find the element with ID and with two classes with and dots, as it will be interpreted using the first example on the left. One thing that was improved is that in the latest jQuery we have the ability to catch exception from the ready callback, from the comment from the jQuery ready callback, right? So previously these errors were not possible to catch, and basically they will be thrown and shown in the console. In the new version, there are even two ways to do this. First of all, specifically for jQuery ready exception, a callback was introduced that can be specified and that will be executed each time when the ready callback throws an exception. And second, as ready is a promise, you can use the fail to catch the error, the fail callback. One more coding sugar is ability to add, remove classes and toggle classes as an array. Previously, we had to specify it as a string, and now we can pass arrays to these methods that will make the code looking better, I believe, just a little bit. So there are other features. For example, yeah, as I mentioned, the jQuery ready promise is formally supported. There are improvements on animations. Nonce and no module support when, so these parameters were ignored previously, and lots of others. As you can see on this page, and probably that's not even the full list. But with these improvements, with the fixes, with the performance optimizations in the new jQuery, there are actually a lot of breaking changes that were introduced, a lot of backward and compatible changes that have to be handled on our side if we would like to move to the new library version. And first of all, as I mentioned, for promises, the signatures, so the callback functions have changed. And for Ajax, I think that's the most common in Magento code base from my experience. So previously, when calling an Ajax and specifying the callbacks, we have used successor and complete functions, and now that's done, fail, and always. So while successor and complete callback functions are not going to work in the new jQuery version, if these functions are defined in the settings object, so if you are passing an object to Ajax instead of calling the functions, you can still use these names as keys in the object, like successor and complete, to specify your callbacks. There is a slight change on how jQuery processes HTML. So that's also a part of performance optimization. So previously, I mean, in the current version that is in Magento, if there is a short closing tag, like if div is specified as one tag instead of two tags, the jQuery will transform it into two tags. So this example here, jQuery from div self-closing and span self-closing will result into the expected div and then span. But in jQuery 3. Since jQuery 3.5, this conversion is not taking place anymore. So the default HTML behavior is for the tags that are not self-closing is just perceive them as an opening tag. In this case, we'll have opening tag of div and opening tag of span. So that will result to an issues. So this behavior can actually restore to the previous one using jQuery migrate 3 to 0. It's not in Magento as of now, but we are going to add it soon. And specifying the jQuery unsafe restore legacy HTML prefilter option. Otherwise, all the tags except the tags that are shown on the screen should have an opening and a closing tag in the HTML processed by jQuery. This is self-closing tag list. You can find it online anytime. And so moving forward, there is also a change on the data key naming. So if the kebab case, the case with the dash is used for defining the data, the new jQuery is actually keeping the data in the camel case property. So while the data can be set and retrieved using kebab case, if you are going to retrieve the data object, the property value is going to be stored in the camel case instead of kebab case. That's something to be aware of. One backward incompatible change that also can be considered as a feature is jQuery Ajax does not remove hash from URLs anymore. So previously it stripped the hash symbol, and right now it will perform the call using the hash symbol as well. That can be used to pass some parameters after the hash, but it's a good idea to check if the server is ready, or if the receiver of this Ajax call is ready to receive the hash in the URL, if that is the case. So some small changes, but the changes that can affect the execution of the code is so if there is a multiple select that is accessed by jQuery where nothing is selected, if you are going to take the value from that multiple select in jQuery 1, it will return null. In jQuery 3.5, it will return 3.5.3.6. It will return the empty array. So in case there are some checks later on, it's worth to pay attention to this one. So one interesting change of behavior of hidden and visible. So the element since jQuery 3.5 3.6, the element is considered visible even if height of width is 0. So if but it's still visible. So previously, if the element was visible but had the height of 0, for example, that makes him physically invisible, the jQuery will also consider it as invisible. One change to cross-domain script requests. So previously, the scripts could be requested cross-domain with jQuery Ajax and GET without the specified data type. Currently, the data type has to be specified if this is done. And jQuery GetScript is not affected because jQuery GetScript is actually adding this data type script anyway. So also additional return change. So the empty set, if you are going to, if you will call any of these methods specified here, the dimensional methods or offset methods on an empty set, in the new jQuery, the return is going to be undefined instead of null, to consider it in the later checks in the code. There are some functions that were removed, that as functions and properties that are specified on the screen. Actually, if you go to documentation, there are quite easy replacements for these functions and properties, but it would be a very good idea to check your code and ensure these functions are not used, and to replace it according to jQuery recommendations. And there are other backward incompatible changes. The biggest one, for sure, the jQuery dropped Internet Explorer 6.8 versions 6 to 8 support. So right now it's 9 plus. The change that probably will impact the jQuery quality more than us, when jQuery runs in strict mode. I don't think that will affect the clients of jQuery, but I do believe that it affects the development of jQuery. And yeah, so document-ready handlers are now asynchronous, and lots of other smaller backward incompatible changes. While not so many functions have been removed, there are lots of deprecated functions as well now on jQuery. And you can see the list here. Probably the most common from this list is bind in Magento. That should be replaced with like bind, and bind should be replaced with on off. And other functions. All these functions also have quite straightforward and easy replacement that is provided by jQuery. So there shouldn't be too many challenges replacing these functions. And I encourage you to replace it, even though they are not yet removed but deprecated. But that is going to make your project easier to upgrade later on. And also, if there is one file with bind function, for example, in your project, this file probably is going to be used as an example later, and as a result, after some time, lots of binds will be used, and lots of bind calls will be used. And if from the beginning, like early, you are going to switch to the new functions that are suggested by jQuery, then that will be a good example for the future development as well. And in the end, you you will have to deal with less of updates for the project and switching to the next version. So the things that are useful to prepare for the new jQuery. So the first thing is to use jQuery migrate while testing. And in the jQuery migrate, there is very nice documentation in GitHub repositories that can be viewed. That basically the documentation describes jQuery migrate warnings, but it can be used to analyze your code as well. jQuery provides quite detailed upgrade guides that can be found on jQuery.com upgrade guide. There is an upgrade guide for 3.0 and 3.5 versions. If there is no upgrade guide available, for example, like in our case, we have to deal with changes introduced in 3.0, 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, and so on until 3.6. So there are also release blog posts for each minor version released on blog.jquery.com. It looks like if you will navigate just to blog.jquery.com, you will see straight away all the blog posts for all the releases describing the changes right there on the left side on their blog. And finally, there is an API. There is a good API documentation for jQuery that also mentions all the changes. Like if you'll try to look for function that is removed or is deprecated in this new version, the API documentation will clearly state that this function is deprecated or removed, and show the examples and describe the alternatives, how to implement it. And also, if you go to API documentation, select deprecated category there, and there are labels for each jQuery API. If you click on removed label, you will see all the removed functions and properties. That's also helpful. And finally, watch 2.4 develop branch with updates, and also stay tuned for our updates, because as we will go through this upgrade process, we are going to share. We would like to share information with you as frequently as possible. Thank you.
Hi, Sergei. So I saw like a couple questions on the topic. So the one is why migration to jQuery? The entire web has already switched to the native selectors. So can you comment on this, please?
Why migrating to jQuery and the alternatives?
Yes, the entire web has already switched to the native selectors.
Well, that's a good and interesting idea. We are not migrating to jQuery; we are upgrading jQuery, and as for the switching to the native selectors, I'm not exactly sure what they mean. I don't think it is going to cover all the functionality that we use, and switching to native is going to be quite a big and backward incompatible task for us. And I don't think there are too much benefits from that personally. That's a short answer, but we can discuss it. If you have the proposition on how jQuery can be replaced in Magento with something else, we are always open for discussion.
Okay, cool. So in terms of why upgrading, just a little bit to cover on that. So we do have definitely concerns to the previous versions of the jQuery, including security one, and we are required to address security concerns, at least that. But again, the other thing that we already mentioned today on the upgrading front, removing entire jQuery from Magento, it's a big question. Yeah. By the way, I see we have Igor Minello on the call. So Igor, can you comment on this, please? Okay, probably he doesn't hear us. Okay, yep, thank you, Sergei.
Any other questions, guys?
So I see some questions in the chat from Alex. For jQuery, as it provides a lot of backward and compatible changes, why it's coming to 2.4 develop? Makes sense to do it in 2.5. We are going to simplify that update as we can, like providing the probably some tests from our side, but right now the work that is being done in 2.4 develop is completely backward compatible. We are updating the code base in a way that it's compatible with the old version and the new version. The jQuery upgrade itself will come later, and I hope we'll try to make you prepared for this upgrade so that it will not as backward as breaking for you. That's my understanding on this, my point of view. The next one, does anybody know if new jQuery update bring any performance improvements in JS processing? Yeah, there are lots of performance improvements for specific functions and for jQuery in general. That is described in the documentation. I can, if you are interested about that in more details, I can follow up on this and show you some specific performance improvements. Some of the performance improvements, by the way, resulted in some backward and compatible changes as well, unfortunately. Can return.
That was more a joke. Sorry, I mean you mentioned in your list that it can return on integer values. That was a bit confusing. Like this can return, I mean, and can return. So it's not really the strict type declaration, but that's more a joke.
Yeah. So. Yeah. These functions previously returned only integer values, the sizes, and now jQuery is more precisely calculating, so can return an integer one. And yeah, that's not a strict type, so you can get integer, can get float. Okay.
Okay, guys. Thank you very much, Sergei. If no other questions, we will proceed. So now we're gonna have Eugene talking about cloud managed services support in 2.4.3 and further. So Eugene, over to you.
Thank you. Give me a second. Just guys, I'm sorry, I'll need to reconnect real quick. Just 1 second, okay? Because my Mac didn't want to share the screen.
Oh yeah, sure, no problem.
Okay, I'm back. Thank you. Okay, so can you see my screen?
Yeah, I can see it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So I'll try to be quick since we don't have too much time left. But basically what we wanted to talk today about is introduction of official support for cloud managed services. And at this time, we're talking about AWS. And actually see some people who already probably seen this content on the summit hackathon we did with AWS team. So basically, starting with our strategy, we are trying to basically provide the most scalable platform supporting massive traffic for large organizations, large catalogs, and still providing proper security and performance at the same time, so that we don't make those kind of trade-offs that we actually need, to sacrifice performance to host bigger catalogs or vice versa. So we're trying to find solution basically which will provide best performance at the same time with whatever catalog or other settings you may want to configure inside your Magento. And finally, we really want our partners and customers to be able to go live really quick and easily without, I would say, spending too much time on figuring out the infrastructure part and how to make the store performant. And basically, over time, we were getting lots of questions on when we will start supporting services which are kind of latest and greatest on the cloud provider side. So we worked with AWS very closely to basically introduce official support into Magento for the services you see on the screen. So we basically took each service we are using, like database, Elasticsearch, Redis, and others, and selected one of the managed services on AWS side, which we find fits best for the purpose. MariaDB, MySQL will go to Aurora. Basically, Elasticsearch remains being Elasticsearch, but it's a managed one. Elastic Cache is going to kind of replace Redis, or I mean not replace, but basically be an alternative to Redis. AWS recently released managed RabbitMQ, which wasn't available before, which is great because previously we had only the SQS option, and that required actual additional development in Magento. So RabbitMQ basically works natively, and so far we didn't find any issues. And definitely S3 for some media storage, some static content, and things like that. So lots of these things were used previously by some partners and customers, but we never supported it officially, meaning, whatever issues may have been happening there, we couldn't really look into that and help much. But now we basically, within the last few versions, 2.4.2, we added S3, and 2.4.3, we are adding the rest of these services. We are trying to basically get to a point when we can confidently say that the services are supported and you can build your stack on top of them. And definitely it may take some time to kind of polish everything and make sure that, in production it's performing the way we expect, and actually kind of battle test all of these services. But testing each one of these, we basically seeing good improvements here and there in terms of performance, stability. You get some added benefits like auto scaling for most of them. As you know, in our cloud, we have the tier separations option, where basically you have like separate web server and like services separately. So basically, with introduction of these like native services, architecture like that would look pretty much the same, but with separation by design, because you cannot just put Aurora on your EC2 instance, right? File system, which is more redundant, and S3 is probably the only service out there which can even do the cross-region backups and recovery. So, and finally, the easier tech stack upgrade. So, as you know, like tech stack upgrades are always complex, especially if we're talking about something like upgrading databases or whatever like that. And you also need to align it with like your Linux or whatever you're using as your operation system. And essentially, it was always hard to upgrade these things. So now, as these things can be separated completely and can be out of the web server location, basically they can all be managed and updated independently, which is cool. So if talking about the timeline and when things become available, S3 basically is in 2.4.2, so you probably have the chance to actually look at it, or at least there were a few presentations about it from our team. So you may have heard that it's there. Not sure if you had time to actually try it, but it's there. In 2.4.3, we're adding a few upgrades to S3 implementation, basically based on some feedback we got and some additional tech debt we had. So 2.4.3 has more polished S3 integration with some additional performance improvements and some other stabilization things. Also in 2.4.3, we were basically taking 2.4.3 and testing against all the managed services on the list here. We can prove now that basically all of them work. They perform, they pretty much are stable to be used with Magento. So there are a few things basically that are still to be resolved. As you may understand, the services are often a little bit behind on the service versions. So, for example, Aurora doesn't support MySQL 8 at this point yet, but luckily we have kind of support for earlier versions and things like that. But basically, we've tested out all of this and are also building like automation now to actually prove that these things work continuously. So either it will be like pull request or some overnight builds. It's still to be designed, but basically the core application will now continuously be validated against the services and making sure it works. I guess the important part to the audience here is what the impacts to future releases and extensions that we have. So, it's kind of up to you if you want to use those or not. We still retain all the previous options we had, like just hosting, for example, MySQL or Redis or Elasticsearch, like on your instances. Or you can go with managed services. But for future releases, there are a few impacts, basically. So, there is additional compatibility testing scope. So, if you're contributing pull requests or contributing code to Magento or, just looking at some like compatibility challenges. So basically, we're now adding additional testing for that. So, for example, as I said, like MySQL 8 is not supported yet in Aurora, and it would mean that the implementation, if something is being done, basically needs to work with Aurora as well. It's not possible anymore to do it just for MySQL or MariaDB. We'll actually need to be consistently making sure things like managed services work. It's more on our side than on your side, because we basically will be having those automation testing in place, but it's definitely like additional scope of testing for us. So we may maintain compatibility with multiple versions of services. So, for example, in like 2.4x versions, we would say, we support MySQL 8 only, but it's not the case anymore. We actually need to focus on supporting Aurora as well. So it would be kind of dual support for services, saying we support one and another one, and we'll continuously kind of upgrade those versions. So test coverage for technical stack and compatibility. As I mentioned, it will be part of our development practices. And impact to extensions. So there are a few things to keep in mind. If you're heavily relying on something like Elasticsearch in your extensions, or similar things like Elasticsearch plugins, there may be some compatibility challenges. So managed services, they are definitely having lots of benefits, like performance, as we discussed, scalability, auto-scaling, easier upgrades, all of that. But at the same time, all of these benefits come with some cost. And basically that cost is some challenges with availability of like plugins or similar things in different services. So for example, if you look at the Elasticsearch plugin list on managed Elasticsearch, it will be shorter than what you would expect, to see from a hosted Elasticsearch. So when you're like developing extensions for your projects or just for bigger audience to kind of like sells those extensions, it's good to keep in mind that not everything is compatible with managed services, and depending on what you're developing it for or for what architecture, there are things to look at. And yeah, finally, I guess it's just a general recommendation, but it would be good to make sure like any extensions or customizations developed are compatible with managed services, because customers, once they realize, sorry, it's my kid. Customers, when they realize the benefits of these things, they will be asking you probably to move them to the managed services, and asking if they can utilize those. So basically, it's important to keep those in mind as well. I guess in short, that's it. If you guys have questions, please let me know.
Yeah, thanks, Eugene. There is one question from Alex. I'll just read it here. So what's the difference between the current AWS Deluxe Elasticsearch compatibility? You can set remote Elasticsearch service in AWS service, and the new one in the Magento 243.
So it's a good question. So basically, as I said, we not always were actually introducing changes, but we were mainly making sure things work. So for database, for example, we had to make changes because there were things that were not compatible with Aurora. So there are changes for database compatibility. For Elasticsearch specifically, it worked as is. So there were no changes in Elasticsearch, except that we made sure that we are not using any kind of plugins by default that are not compatible, that the versions align, that we have proper automation in place to kind of make sure the quality of our integration stays intact over time and similar things. So the support was like interesting because it's not about like huge amount of code contributed, but about huge amount of processes aligned and like automation and testing done and similar things. So we're basically, sure we can say now we kind of officially support those starting 243, but doesn't necessarily mean we introduced a ton of code there.
I see. I see Alex, you raised your hand.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, thank you for a nice presentation. It's really interesting because AWS just like maybe just the future of the cloud and the Magento from my point of view, it's very powerful servers. But I have two questions related to the instance types. So you presented the idea of auto-scaling, and I'm worried about the instance type you will suggest for customers. So what can you say about this?
Yeah, so we're still documenting all of that because different services, basically depending on what they do, they need different instance types. So in previous architecture, basically we were having two instance types that were like C series and M series for web and other services respectively. But in new world, when we get this Auroras and everything else, there may be some, R series involved or some T series involved here and there, because basically not all services need to be, huge by default, and they may be, like in percentage of load, I would say, they can be consuming less resources than the others. So I cannot tell you right now, I guess, the exact instance types. It's something that needs to be tested depending on what exactly you're trying to implement, but we will have some recommendations over time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And I have one more question about the Elasticsearch service. You know that it provides a lot of security settings, and I wonder if you will provide any maybe instructions how to set up this Elasticsearch service just according to the base Magento installation. Yeah, it will be really nice. And of course, if you will provide anything like maybe easy tools for configure the AWS environment, it will be really great, because the AWS provides a lot of stuff from the CLI. So yeah, Do you have any plans for CLI and AWS Elasticsearch service configuration?
Yeah, sure. So ECU Tools does support it already. It was released as part of the last release. So we didn't put that kind of any, big notice about that anywhere yet because, we're still polishing things. But ECU Tools had some incompatibilities basically because compared to the local installation, we needed to like pass over the endpoints and like credentials and all that other stuff. So we fixed all of that, and actually ECU Tools now supports it. So there is, I would say, no official flow documented yet how to set it up, but it already supports it, and documentation is being kind of in progress as we speak.
Yeah, brilliant news, because AWS just like a great service for the Magento. Tested on my experience, yeah. So looking forward for your documentation. Thank you so much.
Yep, thank you. And yeah, just to add to that, on setting up the services, basically the team is working now on actual documentation, how to do on-prem installation, because that's basically where we are starting from, to get more data on basically how things work. And once things are polished, we will be releasing like ECU Tools documentation. But I mean, if you want to look into what was done in last release, as you know, ECU Tools is open source, so you can always look at that even before the official announcement.
Thank you.
Sure.
Nice. Any other questions, guys? I don't see anything in the chat.
I just want to add a little bit on the open source. So as you know, like a 2.4.3 release is going public beta soon. I believe early June. We will have public beta for 2.4.3, so you will be able to try out all this nice stuff which we were talking about. So please keep watching the communication and updates. Also, we have schedule for the public beta and EAP on our DevDocs website. So if you're interested to participate, just shoot us an email and we will get you onboarded.
Yep, and you can always find us on Cloud Slack, as you all know. So we're pretty active there. So in case something interesting comes up, just find us there.
Yeah, really interesting. Thank you so much for this update. It's really great. Looking forward for the upcoming release.
Cool, sounds good.
Okay, guys, if no other questions, then I think we can wrap up. Thanks, Eugene, for the presentation. It was very nice. And thanks, everybody, for joining us. Really appreciate it and hope you guys have a nice day.
Thank you, guys. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.